Okay, we're going to start because we have Naomi joining us from the West Coast, and she's had to wake up very early to do this, so we don't want to keep her waiting too long. And welcome to the afternoon session. We're going to do a very quick introduction of the speakers, and we can see Naomi online now. And then I'm going to hand over to Kat. So Kat Chong is a poet, publisher, and publisher who completed their PhD in medical humanities at NTU Singapore as a Nanyang President's Graduate Scholar in 2024. Their publications include Plain Air, An Apology in Transit, and When Health Becomes Available, which came out in 2026. As I've said before, long bios are online and in your handbook, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. Their debut monograph, Genre Queerness in Contemporary Experimental Life Writing, Gender, Genre, and Disability, is forthcoming from Bloomsbury Academic. Naomi Ortiz, is a Reclaiming the US-Mexico border narrative awardee and a 2022 US Artist Disability Futures Fellow. Ortiz's collection, Rituals for Climate Change, a Crip Struggle for Eco-Justice, out in 2023, offers potent insights about the complexity of interdependence, calling readers to deepen their understanding of what it means to witness and love an endangered world. I will mention one other book, the nonfiction book Sustaining Spirit, Self-Care for Social Justice, which came out in 2018. And without going into the many other publications and so on, I'm going to hand over to Kat.
Hello, can everybody hear me in the room today? Yes. Naomi, can you hear me as well? It is lovely to see you. To give a brief visual description, I am a mixed race, British Asian individual with very short hair. I'm wearing a grey mask. I have a corduroy jacket on, black trousers, and a cream coloured shirt. Naomi, I realised this was the one bit of our conversation that we kind of didn't necessarily agree on. Do you have a preference on who reads first?
Go for it.
Okay, amazing. So I'm going to be reading from 712 Stanza Homes for the Sun, which is essentially a slightly weird poetry book on disabled life, living at the kind of intersection between pandemic lockdown, military kind of occupation sites, and a university campus at the far west corner of Singapore. 398. I live between 14 military bases. In so much pain, the bombs would weep pumpkin pip seed messages denoting time, the pit boy counting units of radiation, the radar, a nautical investigation. The commons are here at the beginnings of water. I'll be right back. I'm just going to get a black pen. The root word for blacken is the same word for bleach, bleak, and total whiteness. To some of our most sacred texts, genre doesn't really apply. When I write, says Mary Ruefle in Madness, Rack, and Honey, my gender becomes genre. To some of our most sacred texts, gender doesn't really apply, swerves off the radar out of algorithmic fidelity. To be untraceably genred, untrackably gendered, is to live untargetably as in things. As the mirrors are blackened and bleached, so absorption voids the image. This is still an archive and looking for places to hide. Perhaps I should not be writing at all, a poetics of pips that knows how long I have left to plant or search for soil, a kinship to acknowledge the land and the possibility for grounding, whether it'll emerge or look back in laughter or cold water. I have no interest in weapons or their complicity. I am love hungry. I want to reply to you once I understand where the light is coming from. Blur with me. I have failed the song of living. Blue with me. I finished that poem and the next day my brother died, said Peter Gizzi on day 395, the 29th of January 2021. On the 1st of February, Lisa Robertson's Instagram answers back. In an image of 26 theses on craft, she writes, 24, there is always something to do. 25, blank. 26, craft, against death. 400, I've been keeping count of the days. Since the 1st of January 2020, counting the multiple precarities of the vulnerable, waiting to be allowed to see my family, my partner, my friends, the list gets longer each time. I can still hear the bombs, the military jets, the live firing from the Pyongyang gun range that's under half a mile away, the Pasir-Labar range that's a mile and a half away, and because I cannot tell the sound from which, and because an NS National Service Training Institute marks a perimeter just beyond the storm drain along the northwestern perimeter of the campus, and an SAF Singapore Air Force Base borders the south, and because the military holds all the land west on every blank map, perhaps regardless whether it's the record or the countdown, the dread is still the same. Perhaps this still is anecdotal, an unsubstantiated structure of belief with which to convey the unverifiable, the legal, institutional, empirical subterfuge. Jurong Island is just over 4 miles south. Shell, Chevron, BP, ExxonMobil, the Petrochemical Corporation of Singapore, and many more occupy the reclaimed artificial land. Taxi drivers tell me it's used for toxic chemical manufacturing, but that's just the rumour, the eavesdrop, the goss. The tone is still the same. Jurong Island, chronic pain, military property, invisible disability. Believe me, please, the centre burnt cocoa, the Cadbury's chocolate factory, ADM cocoa, Kongguan biscuit factory, the poultry farms in Sungai Tengah all hang in the air at night. "574. A taste of the metaphor and low lights burned all through the night. It's fine. I snuck in quietly. I am in your blood. Replace language with antibodies here. The screen holds so much time the ghosts give a silent ovation. This is my 5th move in 18 months, and I leave spiderwebs by the window to go looking for the sky, a garden I don't find. But there's a bolt between the door and its frame, which is to say I break onto the roof instead. Come stand with me beneath solar panels. On the 14th floor, the construction site, light sparks falling down the building's sides, stair grace, storm grace, even affectively boundless, it's never out of bounds. This pain is hostile to the soul. It tells me that I too have this capacity. The macaques come in again on day 574, the 27th of July, spilling uncooked grains of rice, take my roommate's coffee pods, granola, breakfast cereal, and another blank reel of Polaroid film. I wonder if I've seen these macaques at a poetry reading, leaving an edible pattern of cereal on the air conditioning unit outside the kitchen window, another coffee pod, the contents on the railing. They tear open the film, the ink at the base of the square. Their black fingerprints, white film, tear all of them apart. My concern about these, I've made ink eaters out of macaques, an ingestion of the untraceable kind. I keep the film and their fingerprints. Protest is an illegal substance in this place. Arbiters of safety deem codeine Class B. On the first day of induction, the cops announce I could be expelled, ejected from the institution and the state if they find it in my blood. I know it's a scare tactic, that the threat and I are inseparable. "643. There are shortages everywhere. I pass Supply Chain City each time I get a cab home. The half moon has taken me for dead and the radio plays Unstoppable Time, a live transmission as someone new breaks the speed limit. There's something in the water, and tonight it might be me. We have 14 hours to find out. In this realm, tonight is in now. Total strangers DM me about the beauty of the moon. Tell me about the negativity of my art resulting from the test performed on day 638. I've been watching the internet break star-shaped hearts out of honeycomb. At Speaker's Corner, the space of Singapore's densest silence, is the uncanny feeling that we are all that is left. In the cell reproduction of this logic, open the world to me. The mirror is a misrepresentation of distance, with more revelations to come, our stereoscopic parallax of doom scrolling until dawn. It's hard to find the perfect adverbial clause. All I gotta say is you better be. Facebook goes down on a bot of line-written code, and Singapore's colonial law of sedition is replaced by another, by which I mean they both remain the same. We know reality should not be ordered by a process of imposition, like public building sites' metal billboards growing up from the ground to hide construction, light blue metal strips in the equatorial sky to make some arrangement of round gardens. I don't know how to tell you about the colonial derangement of this image, how the mistranslated monuments lie straight out of place. 650. I accept the task from the sun, the moment of insight, circumstance of the spheres. I haven't been able to tell you, right before the planets went mainstream from day 654, when the Singaporean government announced it would allow vaccinated travelers from Canada, Denmark, France, Italy, the Netherlands, Spain, the US, and UK. We think the same things at the same time, can't do anything about it. After 650 days, I'm granted approval from my institution to go home. I don't care about the power of my passport out and endless as far as we nurture it. We can all make blood. The street lights never go out. The roots are a textured aura of anything fixed. The loving will for contact, a difference in ephemera, conditions of degradation and dissolving found in pledged violence is what these islands will do to you. My tongue is feigning an abstraction, peering for lichen that I haven't seen on public walkways or signposts in so many years, looking at a parent's flat face on my phone screen. Poetry inoculates me for the shortest amount of time. I'm still moving in languages complicit in ongoing genocide. Remember this in every single tense, an unlucky god or desperation, neither delusion of my many-mothered tongue. There's a comma before the thunderstorm, magnetism and irreparability. We put it on paper to discover it outside ourselves. I don't want to keep it on the inside of my mouth. On the new patient demographic intake form, I'll be right back. These are my preferred proverbs. So tell me, medicine asks. So tell me who you are. Nine. A perforation center for the existing noon. By carbon emissions, lines of HDB lights go by. I conclude like the plastic-packed codeine sheets in my suitcase as the government announces the guilt of a one-man assembly. The law makes our multiplicity visible, our careers talking to ourselves on the internet, a fame of multiples sent in at once. It rains at 4 in the afternoon, and a small sunbird builds its home outside the window on my balcony, and the stars have been so bright. I want to think about how woozy it is to be in the words, the sun in all these days. I know I'm overusing the world. 17. From the fourth basement to the biochem department. Perhaps to answer memory, distance, time, is to vanish inside it, to a place no trace left behind, of deaths who will never know us, where hearing is scheduled and postponed. The police are not the priests of this age, thinking through the lyric end. I'm trying to stop. Oh, Singtel, my mobile carrier, sing for me. Tell me why red dust clouds rise behind my apartment as a man cycles between my body as the macaque that charged on my skin, as white women believe in my servitude in places that I can never afford, to the buildings which will never touch the words. As I bathe nothingness into the morning, supply chain city, the broken speed charts, all red receipts without stopping my heart before the nation's city state truly leaves us, scarcely trying to predict the rain, ice cubes, central cake slime depart. I just need a moment to compose myself. In pain, I pass beyond sense, but the birds are the birds and a live transmission of poetry. I travel the alphabet, pain, be anonymous, moreover, a precedent for the imperfect tense of this world, the word, moreover, return. From statistical time, dear world, dear word, return. There are speech acts beyond the sky. Take me home to all the world, the eternal world. Remember, I will not erase. What we do in the poem is return from death, the fact of a feeling's past tense, out of body, of breath, of time, compelling the page, the public instance of speech to say, we are here, we are here, we are here. Return, return, return. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for inviting me to be here with you today. My name is Naomi Ortiz. Kat, thank you for that beautiful reading. Yay. Um, it looks like my eye is going to start watering. So, very crip moment here. And we will just go with it. We'll see how this affects my ability to read what I brought. I am My name is Naomi Ortiz. I'm joining you from Tucson, which is in the Sonoran Desert, very close to the US-Mexico border in Arizona. It is the contemporary settlement of the Yeome, which is Yoeme, and the Atham, which is Oodham. And I honor the land and the sky and the practices of listening and my eyes, who I love, who are watering. I am wearing a shirt with embroidered flowers and glasses and earrings, and I have dark hair, and I have red lipstick. And behind me is an older piece of artwork titled Resistance is Fertile. And it is an arm planting different seeds of plants that haven't made it. And on the arm it says, "Is it accessible?" The one plant that is thriving and has flowers is rooted to disability community and culture, and there's photos of protest and celebration in terms of disability community. So I'm going to share a little bit from some of the work that I've been doing around imagining um, or trying to touch in with what has been really scary to me. I live in an area that is accelerating very quickly with climate change. And last week we had 3 days in March with where it was 41 degrees Celsius, which I don't remember that ever happening in my lifetime. Usually temperatures like that are in May or June. So it's very real here, and the grappling with it is happening in many different ways. And I think people, yeah, I will read a little bit. Um, so when I was first researching and looking into how other people were talking about nature, one of the things I noticed was that people really centered on nature as like the wild spaces and cityscape as not nature. So I wanted to really rethink that. And this piece has a content note. It does include medical interventions as part of the subject matter. Nature defined. Nature is in the edges between this world and the next. ICU breathing tube, feeding tube, where I hold her arm around oven mitt padded hands to not disturb the steady beat of interventions fueling life. At the edge of the parking lot, a plastic bottle rolls off wind's tongue. I get to know nature from the formerly unnoticed cusp of human dominated and wild. She surprises me outside my door. Baby mesquite tree shades ants pillaging our bounty. Orange sunset, pink clouds, golden peach bloom into night. She reminds me how to push on. Births dawn. Pale light outlines bed. Bookshelves hold tattered journals, pictures of mi familia, all my earrings. And my love, a sheet draped hip silhouette, sprawled long length, toe dip off the mattress. Nature sits with us at the old wooden table, drinking ginger beer and rum with lime, pricks my skin with splinters of laughter, venting the day to make space for tomorrow. I offer nature tribute, water, fruit, for quails, rabbits, javelinas, ancestors. Nature responds with jokes in the form of sweat, which drips, curls down spine, laces neck with grime, keeps me cool but cranky as I wait to pick my niece up from work. Nature puckers in the still air between strangers clustered behind bus stop shade slats, waiting out baby whale cacophony with patience somehow found in reserve. Help a young mother carry on the stroller. Nature is in the relationship of one living thing with another. She recognizes my scent, nuzzles my chest when I pull out roll out onto dirt road, scooter propelled. Cacti, creosote, brittle bush, red and gray rocks. She welcomes me with open sky. I'm just going to read from some pieces here that are from part of a long piece called To Be Part of the Web of Those Who Love Place. Many of my pieces were written out of really trying to have conversations and listen with the land. And so this is in response to one of the things that the land tells me. And when Kat and I get a chance to talk more, we'll go into this more. To be part of the web of those who love place. When in fear, I aim for safety. As a disabled person of color, my body, needs, and perspective do not have a home in conventional responses to climate change. Where is safety in this time? Is it in the ways I find to shore up my own security? Is it in voting or giving my proxy to corporations to make changes needed? I am not sure. What I do know is what a pursuit of safety is not. It is not zero waste. I can't reuse bandages. My hand does not pinch 4 fingers to thumb. Elbow cannot bend in order to insert menstrual cup. I bleed too fast, too heavy for cloth pads. Waste equals function. Safety is not found in growing my own food. Choices to have to be made about how my energy is used every day is a finite amount. Do I use that energy to water and tend the soil, or do I use that energy to make meals and clean myself? As a disabled person, self-sufficiency is never viable for survival. I feel like a lost soul wandering around the communities and discourses of the environmental movements, shaking my jangly earrings, whispering hello into the wind, my ghostly presence they cannot quite make out. Yet, they use language in which I recognize my reflection. Mining scars cripple and deform the earth. People are blind to the cost. Pollution spreads like cancer. Disabled bodies are thrust like a dam to make people stop and pay attention. Using the fear of my body and other disabled people's bodies as a metaphor for environmental destruction is just using fear to incite fear. Fear of disability is transferred and leveraged as a cautionary tale to stop us from embracing our environments. And then I'm going to skip down here. It has, yet if disability has taught me anything, it has taught me there is much I do not control. Very little, in fact. But choice always matters. Disability is a life of inhabiting contradiction and venturing into vulnerable unpredictability. A foundational element of ableism is a fear of vulnerability. If one is afraid of being vulnerable, how does one adapt? In the Sonoran Desert, the palo verde tree has green bark in order to absorb sunlight, so it is free to shed its tiny leaves during long periods of drought. Vulnerability is the best teacher of adaptation. Disabled people know that living into the future means learning to ask for help, to be patient, flexible, and insistent. Helping each other is not always convenient, and we can respect our own capacity. Boundaries can also exist. Grappling with interdependence is slowing down, listening, disappointing each other, and mending. And the piece ends with, climate change is a we situation. We have hard choices to make. To flourish, we must consider accessibility and interdependence. interdependence in relationship to everything. How can they be sustained? By whom? Where do we need to just accept the altered state? How do we adapt? Ask for help? How do we prepare not just for suffering, but self-determination? They are what hope looks like now. So I approached the practice of writing this book in terms of, oh, are we back okay with sound? Can somebody give me a wave if we're
Yes.
okay? Great. Thank you. Sorry, I'm just seeing the little chat thing, trying to keep up in this digital magical space that we're sharing. Um, so I approached this work through the practice of rituals. And ritual is a really powerful tool culturally for me. Um, it's a powerful tool to maintain cohesion, to honor our own emotional journeys, and to acknowledge that we don't know if we'll get what we want. Ritual is inherently about journey. It's inherently about the path. And it allows us to be with what is while envisioning something different. At the best, ritual is an intentional act that nourishes ourself, connects us with ourselves, and with a bigger picture. So this last piece I wanted to share with you is a ritual for courage. When I need courage, I draw plants. Like safety can be quantified in drawing, therefore knowing weeds which grow in my yard, at the side of the road, in the arroyo. In this dry, gritty dirt where I sit, life springs up unadorned where animal or wind drops seed amidst everything. Pencil lines arch, friction of hand slides over page, shakes loose what scares me. As shape becomes form, confidence is inspired by stems flung open wide to sun. Leaves bend in flow of breeze, relax, give themselves some room. Tiny flowers at end of long pentacle, entire plant smooth to the touch, blue-green leaves notched at the margin. Later, learn leaves edible, medicinal herb, papalo galite. A practice to learn the secrets behind a name. Fortitude unearthed by greeting what lives at my feet. Thank you. So, Kat, we talked about both of us touching in with fear in our work and the things that scare us, and what can facilitate hope. How does that show up in your work?
Um, I remember like one of the best kind of moments that I absolutely loved taking away from like our initial conversation was that kind of absolute acknowledgement of that fear at the same time as that kind of like requisite and kind of simultaneous longing for either safety or places in which nurture us, in the fact that like the places that do also nurture us, especially in kind of like a devastated kind of ecological moment, are also the places that feel the most devastating. Can I ask you about the desert? Because that felt like particularly pertinent to the way in which we repair our that kind of attention and that kind of energy towards either courage or hope or safety amidst what Donna Haraway is referred to as kind of like a dying world.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm so privileged to live here. I think I learn a lot from the environment that I get to live in, particularly about the wisdom of adaptation. Um, so many things have adapted to live in really intense heat and without a lot of water. We get about 13 inches, no less. I lied. We get 12 inches of rain a year about. which has really fluctuated a lot in these years. And it doesn't mean that the stress and changes aren't impacting this place, but to live in a place that has so far not been scraped away in the same ways that I think a lot of other areas of this country, of other countries, have been because they're easy to live in, um, is an incredible way to see how uh, intact land can function and supports itself to function. It's very much watching interdependence in action. And I'm trying to think, there's a plant that grows here that is saguaro. Um, and they often grow underneath like a nurse plant called a palo verde, other nurse plants too. But the palo verde, especially, there's a beetle that loves to eat the roots of the palo verde. And one of the things I've noticed is where the saguaro is also planted underneath that tree, the beetles tend to get confused which roots is which roots. And it isn't as delicious. And so both plants survive better because the palo verde, gets to not have its roots eaten so much, and the saguaro is shaded from very intense sun when it's very little and more susceptible to that. So getting to like really witness and practice and see that is pretty fantastic.
One thing that I particularly love about your work, kind of as a whole, is the way in which the biodiversity of the land is very much echoed in kind of accepting crip embodiment as a biodiversity in and of itself, as opposed to essentially reframing it within that kind of medical context of lack. Is there any kind of distinction, do you think, as you kind of experience like the desert as it exists, of like disability kind of just essentially integrating itself into that kind of like wider tentacular like enmeshment? So the fact that like there seems to be in your work like almost no distinction between the sun, the rain, the plants, the beetles, and the way in which we experience kind of adapted life as disabled individuals. I'm really sorry, that doesn't sound like a question.
No, I think that, I think, it's like there's also the human impact here too. Living on the US-Mexico border, which is heavily militarized, um, my freedom from birth has been really subject to the whims of Border Patrol, which sets up checkpoints within the country far away from the border, and is always interrogating and uh, militarizing movement. And so one of the things that I think is really interesting is thinking about movement in a place where um, there is so much intactness, like there's very large animals here that now are grappling with a border wall and a second border wall that is being built, uh, dividing, ecosystems, separating water sources, things like that. Um, but I think a lot about resistance and what resistance means here, and following the land's lead in that. And I think that it's a lot about talking with and listening to the land, meaning like this extensive web of life and spirits that we call land, or we refer to as land. And it's hard to hear over the noise of all this militarization, of capitalism. And there seems to be such a desire, I think all over, right there, here, for not just productivity, but control. And so for my practice, I engaged in a series of conversations with the land. At first, I'd show up and I'm such a human, like I'd show up and it's just like, what do I do? I'm disabled. I don't, like in terms of one of the questions I really had was like, as a disabled person, how do I show up and care for this place? Like that's going to look different for me as a physically disabled person than somebody who can like hike through and take out invasive plants or something like that. Um, and so, I show up to the land and I document this in the book, a series of conversations. But the first conversation, I'm very much just like talking about myself and just so full of grief and, going on and on. And finally, when I get to a place of listening, one of the things the land tells me is that it needs me to love harder. And I really had to grapple with um, what loving harder meant because to me, the initial way I took it was like working harder. And that's not necessarily what love is, right? Um, and one of the other pizzas of that is mending, and something that I get to see the desert do often very slowly um, is mend. And I have a person in my life who's a knitter, and she talks about mending a piece of clothing, and she says that like as this sarape or whatever is being mended, the patch that is mended will always be a slightly different color, even if you get the same exact color of yarn or whatever it is, it'll have a different texture to it. And I loved that metaphor so much because I think about that with our disabled bodies. I think about this as the land becomes more disabled, uh, what mending looks like versus this idea of restoration and things going back automatically to the way that they were, uh, and looking the same. And what does it mean to accept this mendedness and to celebrate it and to be in love and support it? So yeah, Kat, I would really love to hear about how you approach your work as a creative praxis.
I think for me, the poem becomes this kind of really unruly space that it kind of allows me to like hold certain things in tension together. Something that I find particularly useful and like generative about the poem or like poetry as it exists as kind of a genre is that sometimes it's a place where publishers will put things when they don't know what else to call it. Like I found that I have far more flexibility in the poem to kind of figure out what I want language to do as this place that kind of doesn't have to adhere to like normative forms of grammar, of punctuation. It's a place where there can be a lot more kind of play in some ways. I think in some ways that's because it kind of operates on a sort of like capitalist illegibility. Like no poet has ever done this to like make money. So that kind of, it gets its kind of like unseriousness in some ways, and it gets a little bit of its flippancy just as a genre. Not to say that the things we don't do in content aren't deeply serious and a deeply kind of serious commitment, but it at least as a form, it's kind of, I guess it's kind of what I really enjoy about it is like riffing off like Ursula Le Guin's like carrier bag theory of storytelling, which kind of allows the poem to be this place for collecting and carrying and like ordering, or not necessarily ordering, but just like holding the kind of stuff of living. And so as a kind of way in which I can hold all of these different parts of my life together, like I can't really separate like my disability from my gender queerness, from like my experience of kind of racialization. I can't really disentangle any of that. So the poem feels like a really good place in which to be able to kind of hold that together, or at least to try in some kind of slight attempt. But yeah, because I know we really had this conversation of like, especially with was it Rituals for Climate Change, like trying to find a publisher that would allow you to kind of have artwork in a poetry book was something that was like quite a surprising challenge. And so at least kind of under the guise of poetry, there have been some things that have become very possible in places where either fiction, non-fiction, or even like journalism just kind of haven't really made possible.
Mm.
I was just getting Kat's mic, even though I have my own. Don't know why. Just to follow up on what you were saying, Kat, something I really noticed in both your readings is this porosity between the structural and the kind of intimate Kat, you talk about like militarization and colonialism and the land and the body in one breath. And Naomi, there's a lot, there's so many things in what you said where nature really comes alive in the interstices, where like it's the relationships, and then you were also talking about safety, and where safety is when you're basically handing over all your information to kind of corporations, and it's there's the sort of the body embodied bodiness of this information, as well as get these kind of larger, often invisible structures of kind of capitalist, post-capitalist society as well, which kind of are, they're constantly leaking from the colonial, they're leaking from these kind of militarized spaces that we live in. So I think this question is about poetry to some degree, and method and research, in that how you're holding or making space for these larger structural questions that you're asking, as well as lived experience. And I don't know, there's more. It's not just lived experience. There's something else that's going on as well. So just curious about kind of the use of poetry, but maybe the use of other modes of working as well.
Thanks. Should I start?
Yes.
I love that question. Thank you so much for like weaving all of that together. And Kat, I love the idea of poetry as a tangle. That's like what I was imagining, a tangle of things. When I was first approaching this project, I came across an article by a leading climate change scientist who works with the public, and was saying that people are really struggling with shock. And then when they were looking at surveys that they did of people, that people weren't talking to each other about climate change. And it really struck me because I feel like I had been carrying for many years now this deep fear, this deep grief about what I'm witnessing, and I haven't been talking about it with other people other than to be in that, like, that clutched, like scared place. And so when I was contemplating how to approach this as research, really, I thought about this quote from the first book that I wrote. I interviewed a bunch of activists doing social justice work in the US and Mexico and Nicaragua. And there was a birth worker, or a quote from that book comes from a midwife, Maria de la Cruz. And she said that all ceremonies are for the purpose of movement. All ceremonies are for the purpose of movement. And that has stayed with me so deeply. There's also an Indigenous scholar from Tasmania, Lauren Tynan. I'm going to read this so I get it right. Who talks about the concept of ceremony helping to emphasize and perform the transformative potential between entities. So the concept of ceremony helping to emphasize and perform the transformative potential between entities. So I really ended up approaching my work as a practice of ceremony. I wanted to confront my own fear and my own vulnerability and what I was grieving. And I think when we initiate a process of recognizing a thing, of naming it for ourselves, it really becomes a way of being able to think it through. And that creativity that we bring to that process of thinking it through, it empowers us in the face of these threats. And it can give us a real sense of what's possible. And I think that, to me, the deep essence of this project is like, how do we touch things that are scary? And then how do we talk about them with each other? And how do we show up in not just like, okay, we're going to work harder, right? But we're going to love harder, and what that can really look like. But I'll turn it over to Kat if you would like to share a little bit too.
Yeah. This is firstly to say that like staying with the trouble on kind of like webbing and enmeshment, it very much is not me. I have to like give credit to Donna Haraway and staying with the trouble, especially her section of the book on tectacular thinking, just to be like, to give credit where credit is due. I very much, especially living in Singapore, which is a really, really small island city state rather, that kind of prides itself on like being a garden in the city. The kind of really larger structural kind of impositions play out at a really small level. Like it's really, really impossible to get away from the kind of larger scale, almost like semantic logistics of the state, just because you're having to move through them constantly. And so that very much like concern with the kind of logics of the border that constantly infiltrate and become like tangible forces in the organization, and like literally the navigation of every single other thing in that place just kind of forces that recognition of, yeah, the personal is political, because like nothing at my body ends at my body. It moves through the legislation, it moves through the kind of organization of space, through the universities, through the social structure, like through all of it. And so partly because the poem has this like capacity for illegibility, at least at a kind of commercial level, it became a very good place to like hold these things together, especially in a place where critiques of the state are a lot more heavily policed than they are here. And so being able to kind of move between both spaces has given me like a real like kind of understanding of what language becomes possible in what place and how specifically.
Yeah. Thank you. That's super fascinating. I know we're running a little bit late. No apologies. This is just to kind of prime everyone that we're kind of closing soon. We do have time for maybe 2 questions. I know there's one online which I can start with because it has arrived on my phone. And then while you get your questions ready in the room. This is for Naomi, and it asks, love the artwork, or says, love the artwork, resistance is fertile, and then asks, can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, thank you. This actually, this is Naomi speaking. This is actually one of the very first pieces that I really tried to like. I really wanted to be explicit about disability, and I really wanted to be explicit about living in a place that is very inaccessible. The area, the city I live in, it's older, doesn't have a lot of wealth to it. So access is really challenging. And uh, a lot of what I feel moved to do is speak to the place that I live and also speak to the communities I'm from. I think that, like, for example, in disability community, I find so often that we spend so much time trying to explain disability to non-disabled people. And in there can be actually, to me, much more like fruitfulness and life in talking to each other about what we're learning and experiencing and growing into within disability, which is why spaces like this are so important. Um, yep, this is a piece that has, there is a signs, we're here, we're disabled, get used to it. There's folks being arrested, historical photos from Tom Olin, documenting disability rights in the US. And behind me, there is a sign about rights for detainees with disabilities and immigrant detainees, that we demand that they receive adequate food, clean water, basic health care, mental health care, due process, freedom from restraint and seclusion, ADA 504 compliance, respect, dignity, and humane treatment. So I think that there's like this symbolicness I was trying to capture with planting seeds and seeing things not grow. Every time we ask, is it accessible? I'm sure there's so many of us in this room that like go through that all the time, and having people not know or say no and not getting to participate in so much of day-to-day life. And then what really does end up being fruitful and blooming is where community is part of making that happen, where we insisted is so. So thank you.
Wow. It's a really fantastic note to end on in many ways. There is a connection that I want to make with the Tom Olin photo, but before that, I want to say a very, very big thank you to both speakers. And just to continue with my spate of housekeeping, there is for those of you who are signed up for the workshop, it starts at 4:30, correct? Not 4, has already started. So if you're still in the room, then you will go to it tomorrow. But the connection with the Tom Olin photo is that we do have a photo by Tom Olin in the exhibition Misfits at the Paul Mellon Center. And it's great when things just tie up so neatly together in a conversation. But the center is open till 5:30, so if you did want to head over and see the exhibition, feel free. See you all tomorrow, and a very big thanks.